Hi, in this video, I'm going to have a quick look at how to work with raw data, so straight from a camera. So we've shot some material in this example on the Blackmagic cinema camera, and now I understand this may not match everyone's workflow. Here I'm going to literally just import the footage directly into After Effects, so this is only looking at this in After Effects. But if I go to my project panel and double click that, and I'm going to go to my V drive because I had some green screen work, here we go, that I shot with some students. So I'm going to select some footage here, so you'll see that this is cinema DNG files which come from Blackmagic cameras, and each frame is an individual file. So if I click on that, you'll see it automatically recognizes that this is an image sequence file, and the way it does that is the numbers on the end. So you can see the names are identical, and the only thing that changes is the overall number. So at the end, it adds one digit to each one. And so for that reason, the software recognizes this is a sequence. And so when I select the first file, it automatically sort of says, okay, this is a sequence option, camera raw sequence, and that's ticked. So it's going to bring them all in together. If I uncheck that, it will no longer sort of select any other files. It will just, if I was to click it now, it would only bring in that first frame. So I can control click, maybe bring in a couple of frames, things like that. That's unimportant here. We are bringing it in as a sequence anyway. So click on that. Only the first file. If I was to select all of them here, shift click, it would literally bring in each one as an individual frame, which I don't want. So as long as that sequence button is ticked, and by the way, you'll recognize what it is. So this says camera raw sequence. It could say camera JPEG sequence, camera TIFF sequence, depending on what your individual frames are saved as. Anyway, select the first one, click import, and what it should do is bring it all in. Now in After Effects, what it actually does is it's going to now process the file. So what happens on your camera is this raw data, okay, which is just basically a bunch of numbers, comes in, and then the camera processes it and converts it to a video file basically. That process didn't happen in this case, so it was literally those raw numbers were saved as a file, and we've got access to those directly. Hence why when in After Effects, when you then try to import raw data, you go through this processing section here where it asks about sort of you to set up the color temperature, or gives you options to even adjust things like the exposure. Now what that's really doing, if you'll see if I'm adjusting that, it's actually, it's able to kind of it's not too obvious here because this isn't too heavily overexposed, but let's go back to default. But it is actually able to adjust the overall exposure values a bit. Okay, you'll see it sort of move on the histogram. So what you can find can happen sometimes as well is that you'll have bits that are slightly overexposed, and you pull the exposure down and you're able to see that detail. And that's because my screen that I'm working on is an 8-bit screen, but the video footage, as far as I recall, I think is a 12-bit from the Blackmagic. So there's actually more information there that you're able to display on the screen. So you're able to adjust the exposure to kind of change which parts where the exposure is sort of overall set. And in regards to like color temperature, it's, the color temperature itself is just an adjustment in the camera's calibration. So the numbers that are coming in based on sort of the luminance values don't change. It's just it's changing sort of which color it assigns to. So actually you can do a color temperature shift in here. It literally is sort of as you would do it in camera. But anyway, there are obviously a few other settings there, but for now, like I said, what we'll do is we'll jump in. So we're not really gonna adjust any processing on it. If you were looking at it, sorry, actually, I'll just quickly add. Generally, the key things I usually do is obviously one, just adjust temperature possibly if I need to, and the other one is, so you've got exposure, but notice you've got highlights and shadows. Okay, so normally I'm adjusting them in those areas as well. Those are kind of the key things that I'll probably touch upon. Anyway, we'll leave that as it is. Click OK. And we'll bring that in. So there we are. And this is actually only like if we look here at the time, this is a 18 frames. So it's just a second and a bit. And its size here is 228 meg. So you kind of get an idea of just how large the files are. There are a couple of things here, by the way. Notice the frame rate is set to 30 frames per second. That is a Premiere default. Sorry, not Premiere, After Effects default setting. So by default, it doesn't know what frame rate it is because it's just got all these individual images. So it assigns 30 frames per second. which is actually incorrect in this case because it was recorded at 24. So what I'm going to have to do is right click, interpret footage, and go to main. Okay, and you can see that it assumes that it's 30 frames per second. I'm going to set that to 24 instead. Click OK, and you'll see obviously that's changed the overall time. It's 2 seconds, which is actually what it was. This was a 2-second clip. So it's important to do that right at the very beginning, because what we don't want is that to start working on a project and then realize and have to change the timings of it. So anyway, we've got that, and I'm going to just drop that onto my comp and try to play that. And to be fair, I think on this machine it shouldn't really take too long. You can see it's rendering, which is the green bar on the top, and the playhead is sort of following along. And then once it's done that, hopefully it'll start to play in real time. Okay. But raw data generally, given its immense size and also the fact that it's sort of having to be processed by the machine as it plays each of these frames, um, means that it takes usually a lot longer to sort of play through. It's slower to work on. Okay, like I said, on this machine, it didn't take too long, but even then, it could have been quicker. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to generate a proxy. So a proxy is just a copy of the original footage, but at a lower resolution. Okay, and it's something we can use to work in. So if you think about it, for example, the resolution of this is 2400 by 1350, which is great if I need to zoom in or anything like that. But otherwise, right, the screen display I'm working on here is 1920 by 1080. So I wouldn't even be able to view this image in full size on this screen. If I did, I wouldn't really be seeing the full 2400 by 1350 resolution. So in a frame this small, okay, that's absolutely not needed if all I'm doing is sort of working on it like this. Obviously, for effects, if I need to zoom in and so on, that's different. But generally, what we have right now is like slowing the machine down a bit, and perhaps we don't need to work on the full resolution at all times. So we can switch to a proxy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this file here. So there's my DNG sequence. Okay, and I can right click, and you see I have the option to create proxy. Now it also has a set proxy, and that's if you've already generated a low res version. So if you've created a low res version of this somewhere, you could go set proxy, and you can tell it where that proxy is. But I haven't done that, so I'm going to go to create proxy, and I can also create a still. So you might be like, well, why would you create a still? So imagine if I've got, I don't know, background footage of shot as raw or something like that, and it's going into the background, and I'm just keeping it there. Do I really need to see it as a video? So I could just replace it with a still. But in this case, obviously, our subject was waving a little bit, so I need to replace it with a movie. So I'm going to go to movie, and you see it just jumps to our standard render queue. Okay, and so if you rendered out on After Effects before, this will look quite familiar to you. Output 2, this is where it's going. So I'm going to go into here, I'm going to go back to my VFX folder. There we are, which is where I was working. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm just going to call it Proxy. Okay, and I'm going to save this in there. So this new file I'm going to create is going to be saved in there, and you'll see by default it's doing it as an AVI. So let's change that. Okay, so you've got two options you want to do on an output module anyway. You want to change the format and possibly the format settings. Those are usually the two things you want to adjust. So we'll see what we've got. Now I've got a limited set of options on this machine, but you may have a few more on yours. So I'm going to go to QuickTime, and then I'm going to go to format options and see what they have. Now there's actually a whole range of stuff that yeah, again, it depends how many codecs you've got, but you can see there's quite a lot there. However, you can see by default on mine anyway, it went to ProRes 422, and I'm quite happy to keep it at that. And there's 422 HQ, which has slightly more data rate, so it's slightly larger than 422, and then there's also 422 LT, and there's 422 Proxy, which get lower and lower basically. I don't know if that's for light or something, I can't remember, but it's less than the HQ and the 422 there. So, but I'm going to go for Proxy. Okay, Apple ProRes 422 Proxy. So Apple ProRes is designed as an editing codec, and what that means is every single frame is unique. It's its own individual frame, which is actually better for the video editor. So it's not it's easier for it to play back. It's sort of like a self-contained frame, but at the same time, it's a video codec. It's compressed somewhat, so it can play back quite easily. So I'm just struggling to click the OK button right at the bottom. I'm going to see if I can do that. Right, not too sure why the size, there we go, size of this is so large. There we go, click OK. So I've set up my format options, QuickTime, ProRes, there we go. And if I press render, this should then render this clip out into that proxy folder I just created. Sorry, the one thing I didn't forget to change, but sorry, I didn't mention is obviously the output to there, when I clicked on it, I set my location, but I could also, if I wanted to, have set the name. I didn't change it. So to me, that kind of makes sense because the name remains the same. So the name here is the same as the original file. So there you go. So you'll see now the file name on here is still showing the same. So that, yeah, it's got the actual name, but .dng, which is what the original files are. However, I'm not looking at the original files because next to that we have a column called type, and you can see it's telling me it's a QuickTime file. Okay, so it's not, our other sequence isn't our other files aren't QuickTime at all. They are DNG. So that is the proxy I'm looking at, and you can see the size is 5.6 meg versus I think it was 200 or something before, so it's a lot smaller. So now I'm working with my proxy. Oh, let's have a look here as well. It's giving me a second sequence, right? Okay, with my proxy in there. Okay, that's interesting why it's created a second sequence. Perhaps it's something, I guess, that you should do before you drop it into your sequence. So I was using it, I dropped into a sequence to quickly show or identify playback, but it looks like it generates a sequence off that. So you can see it's the same file in both, in which case I'm going to get rid of that second one so I don't confuse things. So I'm just going to delete that sequence. There we go. Anyway, so I've got my source here, but you'll notice next to it I also have a little button or little square here, and you can uncheck that and you can notice now it's going back to camera camera raw. Okay, raw sequence 228 meg again. Turn it on and it's dropped back to 5.6, and you'll see it in the sequence as well. So notice in the sequence we're getting this little VLC icon when it's a QuickTime file. There we are. However, if I uncheck it in my sequence, it jumps back to the cinema DNG file there. So the name won't give it away because that stays the same, but I'm able to basically, by clicking, and you can also see it up here in the information about the file. So if I click or unclick, I can change between the two. Okay, and I think it's just okay. That's quite nice. So it just kind of highlights. I don't know if you can tell very much, but it just makes it into bold, so I can see which one it's kind of selecting. There we go. And that way, I'm able to very quickly, at least, play that back. You can see now actually that played back a lot faster. Okay, pretty much loaded that up. It still needed to load it up. It didn't have the green bar, so it had to do that, and it pretty much did it in like a second. Okay, so my ProRes codec is working a lot quicker, and that will help me out when it comes to doing other stuff on here. When I'm having to add effects and things like that, that will really start to slow the machine down, but a proxy will hopefully help keep things going quite quickly. Let's see if we can spot any differences. Okay, so we may be able to do that. So here's our video clip. Okay, so I don't know how well you can tell, but there's a little bit of noise and things like that. So let's switch on our original. There we go. That looks a lot sharper. So I don't know how well that'll come out in the video, but that is the original, and that is a proxy. And you can see the proxy does have a little bit more noise in it. Well, I say noise. It's just it's not as sharp's probably the wrong word, but the you can see the definition on the pixels isn't well, they're not as well defined, and the reason for that is because it's about half the resolution of the original. So yeah, that's how we can use a proxy, but we kind of generated that quite quick. I'm going to try one last thing. I'm going to turn that off again, so we're back to the original, and I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to create proxy movie one more time, and so it just takes me back. This isn't something you'd want to do. We did it initially the first time, we're fine, but I didn't mention the render settings, by the way. So ProRes has quite specific settings as to what it will usually use, but let's have a look. I'm going to go back to that ProRes proxy. Okay, and click OK, click OK. But if I go to draft settings up here, this is where I've got options to change the size. Well, and again, I think you can see with the proxy, it's ProRes proxy. It's basically giving you the size based on this. So it automatically dropped it to half, but I could have gone to a third or a quarter. So I could make it even smaller if I wanted to. But as you can see, it was like 5.6 meg. I don't think I need any smaller than that. And you've got things like where it's automatically matching the frame rate of the original file. But if you don't want to, you can change it to something else. So just in case if you did want to change any of those other settings, that's where you would have done it, the draft settings, which is something I didn't sort of mention. But yeah, hope this helps speed up your workflow. Thank you for watching.